The humanitarian crisis that Donald Trump created at the border continues to engulf his presidency right now. Tonight, we're going to give you live reports, including from Chris Hayes in the field. I also have a report coming up on holding White House aide Stephen Miller accountable for his role in all this. Right now, President Trump is on Capitol Hill, and he's huddling privately with House Republicans. Now, some of them have been publicly critical. They may unload even more so in this private meeting.
One of the real tragedies of illegal immigration that kids are often the greatest victims. We can stop this.
The zero tolerance policy can be changed by phone call.
The White House could change it in 5 minutes, and they should.
So the president can do it too, and I think it has to be fixed.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump saying this when he arrived on the Hill. This was moments ago.
The system has been broken for many years, the immigration system. It's been a really bad system, probably the worst anywhere in the world. We're going to try and see if we can fix it. Thank you very much.
We are learning that it is now up to 13 members of the Senate Republican caucus formally asking Attorney General Jeff Sessions to stop it, to stop separating these families at the border until at least they can figure out an alternative. Now, today, the top Republican in Congress, Mitch McConnell, at least claims on the record that he is against separating families for any future legislation. Now, remember, before I show you this, Republicans control the Senate and the House right now. They could pass a bill tonight actually doing what Mitch McConnell's talking about, actually stopping this if they want it.
I support, and all of the members of the Republican conference support, a plan that keeps families together while their immigration status is determined.
What we would do is move these families to the head of the line. In the interim, they would be in a humane, safe, and secure family facility, and hopefully we'll get this problem addressed right away.
So that is what this all sounds like in the Capitol, where politicians talk. Meanwhile, out in the country, as we're going to show you tonight, Donald Trump's orders are being enforced. Children split from their parents, in some cases put in cages, and they are crying. And we're starting to hear the leaks, the audio, little slices of what is apparently a nationwide epidemic. Children crying as they struggle to make sense of what's being done to them. That is what these orders sound like when enforced. This is one picture of what it looks like. Now, if you follow politics and you watch the news, you're probably familiar with a basic, pretty iron rule of American politics that's don't compare things to Nazi Germany, because nothing is like Nazi Germany. But I can show you something else happening right now on Fox News of all places. That is the comparison that immigration hardliner Laura Ingraham pressed on Attorney General Sessions. And he sort of accepted the framework because he responds by contrasting this zero tolerance policy against inbound immigrants and children to Germany's treatment of what he views as outbound migrants.
Nazi Germany, concentration camps, human rights violations. Laura Bush has weighed in, Michelle Obama, Rosalind Carter, got all the first ladies going back to Eleanor Roosevelt. She's apparently weighed in as well. General Sessions, what's going on here?
Well, it's a real exaggeration. Of course, in Nazi Germany, they were keeping the Jews from leaving the country.
Now, against this backdrop, today, Donald Trump is doubling down in this speech on his child separation policy. He's also literally wrapping himself, take a look, giving a big hug to an American flag. You can watch it twice. It looks the same way both times. If you have a sense that things are starting to come off the rails in America right now, that things are getting worse, we can report for you tonight there is a lot of evidence to that end. Let's speak plainly. Your federal government openly admits it's using innocent children as a pawn in an international effort at what they call deterrence. Your government creating camps to detain these children. And the President of the United States is lying about his own policy in a way that is brazenly sloppy, even by his own standard, the kind of lies that actually gesture at one of the more significant questions an executive can ask the rest of the nation in a constitutional democracy. What are you going to do about it? I'm joined now by California Congresswoman Judy Chu. She met yesterday with some of the children separated from their parents at facilities in California. Enrico Morones, a founder and director of Border Angels, and the Chicago Tribune's Clarence Page. Congresswoman, starting with the facts, what did you see on your tour?
Yesterday, 14 Congress members, including myself and leader Nancy Pelosi, went down to the border in San Diego to go to one of these shelters that is housing these children. We saw 62 children ages 6 to 17 who were either unaccompanied minors or were separated from their parents. And it was just overwhelming to see these really young kids, as young as 6, being there by themselves, traumatized by the situation. We were able to talk to the mental health counselors who told us what these children are saying in private, that they feel lost, they feel abandoned, they do not know where to turn next, and they are scared for their lives. And this is not the America that we know.
Is this a consequence of what this Congress that you're a member of has passed, or a consequence of Donald Trump's zero-tolerance orders?
This is solely the responsibility of President Donald Trump. Donald Trump issued the zero-tolerance policy. This is what is causing these young people to be separated. Now over 2,000 of them that have been separated from their parents. And Donald Trump has the ability to reverse this. He could call Jeff Sessions right now and tell him to stop this separation of children from their parents. So yes, it is squarely at the feet of President Trump.
Enrique, many things are polarized in America right now. This is an issue that, as the light has shown and the facts have emerged, the attempt to politically polarize it has become, I think, more difficult. We showed in our intro some Republicans claiming they're against it, although they're not acting on that in the Congress tonight. Take a listen to some of the coverage on the right.
Since more illegal immigrants are rushing the border, more kids are being separated from their parents and temporarily housed in what are essentially summer camps.
Some have referred to them as cages, but keep in mind, this is a great big warehouse facility where they built walls out of chain link fences.
They're saying these child actors weeping and crying on all the other networks 24/7 right now. Do not fall for it, Mr. President. These kids are being
I'm
coached.
so sorry, we have to go.
They're given scripts to read by liberals.
Your response, Enrique?
I'm just outraged. I have been to these facilities. We've been working on the front lines with the people that cross the border or are on either side of the border for more than 30 years with the Border Angels. And a society is judged on how we treat our children. And what is taking place right now is horrific. Donald Trump, without a doubt, is pure evil. No other country in the Americas has walls. No other country in the world separates children from their parents. And to call them child actors, or to have Laura Ingraham laughing, or Jeff Sessions quoting the Bible, same quotes that were used to justify slavery, is outrageous, is unacceptable. People are dying right now because of the wall that already exists. 11,000 people have died because of the 700-mile wall that already exists. We've been putting water out there for more than 20 years. I have dealt with these children. In 2014, we took in more than 100 children that were fleeing violence, much of it caused by U.S. policies in Central America. These people have no legal way of entering the country. They're desperate. And most undocumented people in the world do not come to the United States. There's 250 million around the world. The U.S. has 11 million. But the U.S. is a country that for a long, long time, people looked up to. No longer. What Donald Trump is doing is pure evil. And Jeff Sessions and Pence are right side by side, as are the Republicans. Donald Trump signed an executive order and changed this policy. It's inhumane, and I and many people were crying right now when you played the tapes of what was heard a couple of days ago in the centers. It's horrific. How can people do that? That hasn't happened in this country since the time of slavery. It hasn't happened in the world since the time of the Nazis. And Donald Trump is right there with them. So I'm ashamed. It's an embarrassment. It's horrific. And we need to be outraged and pay attention. We need to make a change. Donald Trump represents the worst of the American spirit.
And Clarence, the White House, as we've reported, strenuously denies aspects of this. They certainly object to some of the historical comparisons. I should mention we've invited Mr. Miller and others on this show, offered them ample time. They're not taking us up on that at this moment. But Clarence, your view of all of this?
Well, that's what's striking to me, Ari. If you're going to have a policy like this, own it. President Trump ran for office on this immigration issue. He was distorting it from the day he announced his campaign. And now that this policy has been implemented and the administration is getting some blowback, he wants to say, well, it's all Congress's fault. They're the ones who created the law and blah, 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 which is not true. He changed the policy. Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced it, and the Department of Homeland Security has implemented it. This comes right out of the Trump administration. And now other Republicans are upset in Congress, those who are getting blowback from their home districts or senators from their home states. But at the same time, they put themselves into this situation because they've stuck with Donald Trump because of some things on his agenda are shared interests that they have that they want to see passed. But now it's like they're holding these children hostage in order
Clarence,
to get Donald Trump's wall.
You're hitting. Let me ask you about that, Clarence. You're hitting that point. You used the word hostage, and this is such a key point because there are always federal policies that have what is sometimes inartfully referred to as collateral damage. What we don't usually see, to your and Enrique's point, and I would think that the Congresswoman was alluding to this as well, we don't usually see the claim that the collateral damage, especially to children, is itself a goal, a quote-unquote deterrent. Take a listen to the administration struggling with that very issue.
Our Department of Homeland Security personnel going to separate the children from their moms and dads?
Yes, I am considering, in order to deter more movement along this terribly dangerous network, I am considering exactly that.
Are you intending to send a message?
I find that offensive. No, because why would I ever create a policy that purposely does that?
Hopefully people will get the message and come through the border at the port of entry and not break across the border unlawfully.
Is that policy meant to be a deterrent or not?
Hallie, I don't think it's so much meant to be a deterrent as it's really just trying to enforce a law.
Clarence, this goes to the moral heart of this. Is this hurting children by accident, somehow, quote unquote, unavoidably, or is it the deterrent goal? You see there on tape people like John Kelly and others admitting it's a goal.
No one will admit to hurting children on purpose. The fact that people want to dodge the reasoning behind the passage of these laws, of which was to try to have a deterrent to people wanting to come across the border. Again, there's a certain hypocrisy to wanting to dodge responsibility for a law which is admittedly flawed. We're talking about our immigration system does need reform. It has for a decade, but it's been a mess in Congress because of gridlock, and part of it's because of the kind of wild accusations and the wild baseless statements that have been made about how we need to have closed borders, we can't have open borders. It's not a question of just having wide open borders versus having nobody come in at all. We're talking about having a reasoned and orderly process and system set up, and we can't do that as long as everybody's just yelling at each other.
Congresswoman?
Yes, I think that we need to make sure that we have comprehensive immigration reform that has been stuck and stymied because of Republicans' objections to it. But the children should not be a bargaining chip in this process, and that is exactly what is going on right now. They are being used as a bargaining chip for $25 billion worth of funding that Donald Trump wants for the border wall. These are horrendous situations where the lives of these children will be affected forever just because of money that Donald Trump wants for that border wall. And that is not right.
We've gone a quarter of the hour, Enrique. With the brief time we have left, what's the key fact you want people to know about the truth on the ground?
The fact that these people that are coming in, that they have no line to get into. the people that are desperate that are crossing the border. And those that do have a line apply for asylum, and Trump calls them animals and MS-13.
Right.
There's a lot of lies out there. These are human beings.
Right.
We should be treating people with dignity and respect. We need humane immigration reform. It wasn't the Democrats' fault. It's one person's fault. It's Donald Trump. And like I said, he is pure evil.
Enrique
we need people to
Morones,
see this.
thank you. I want to thank you for sharing your view of this, Congresswoman Judy Chu and Clarence Page. Coming up, I'm going to share my thoughts with Stephen Miller, holding him accountable for his role in this policy. Also, we go live to the border with Chris Hayes, is reporting from Texas, and some big news in developments in Michael Cohen's case and the rumors he might flip. Also, I sit down tonight with Obama's former CIA director, John Brennan. I'm Ari Melber, and you're watching The Beat on MSNBC. Donald Trump's orders to split up families at the border is not some accident or collateral damage from a broader strategic plan. It is the goal of his administration. When you see these images of crying toddlers or hear the voices of 6-year-olds wailing as they come to grips with border agents detaining them and hauling away their parents, you are seeing and hearing this policy as intended by Jeff Sessions' memo directing this crackdown on migrants with, quote, zero tolerance for the humanitarian exceptions that administrations in both parties previously applied. We all know Trump campaigned on this kind of crackdown. We know he got many of these ideas from Jeff Sessions, who was actually the very first senator to endorse Trump. But where did Sessions get these ideas? That's the focus of our accountability report right now. Because as America looks in horror at what is being done in our name, we must also reckon with who is doing it. Accountability, of course, starts at the top with President Trump and Attorney General Sessions, but it doesn't end there. Beyond the Attorney General and Trump cabinet members who oversee these policies, there is the architect who helped create them, a 32-year-old former aide to Jeff Sessions who drives Trump's immigration policy. And to see how the U.S. ended up in this situation we're in tonight, traumatizing children by choice, as we as a nation face these allegations of human rights violations, you also have to see how Stephen Miller got us here. And that history could inform our road out of this mess. There's a famous saying, a problem well stated is a problem half solved, and many experts say Stephen Miller is the root of this problem. He holds a radical view, contradicted by our Constitution, a view that is actually more lawless than it is traditionally American. It is a view, he states, that on immigration, President Trump has unlimited powers that will not be questioned.
Our opponents, the media, and the whole world will soon see, as we begin to take further actions, that the powers of the president to protect our country are very substantial and will not be questioned.
Miller was incorrect about that. That travel ban he was discussing there, well, it sparked not only operational chaos, but was later halted and narrowed by the courts. Trump forced to respond to that questioning, if you will, with a revised travel ban. The Supreme Court is expected to rule on that this month. But apart from ideology, Miller's competence has also been questioned. His own co-workers and allies concluded he wasn't fully competent to keep working on the travel ban, The Guardian noting he was removed from the process of writing the revised ban, and fellow conservatives called out Miller for hurting Trump by rushing out other immigration plans that were not competently vetted for legal scrutiny.
People are going to make mistakes. I think you saw that with Stephen Miller and that rushed out ban on Muslims that was not really a ban on Muslims.
You have to really attribute that failed push at a travel ban to people like Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller, who crafted this thing, reportedly crafted this thing without really running it through the legal checks.
When Congress was working towards negotiating immigration reform, which Donald Trump claims this week he wants action on, well, even Republican senators took the rare step of calling out Miller as a staffer by name.
As long as Stephen Miller is in charge of negotiating immigration, we're going nowhere.
Going nowhere. Now, other observers say Miller doesn't mind these critiques, or he may even relish them, because he's not interested in traditional public interest policy making. They argue that, kind of like Steve Bannon, he actually views policy as kind of a spectacle, no matter who gets hurt. Some have written that he sees a value in constructive controversy, which he thinks will bring enlightenment. Long before Trump trolling even became a political phrase, Miller used a combative trolling style in high school when running for student council.
Hi, is sick and tired of being told to pick up my trash. And we have plenty of janitors who are paid to do it for us.
Plenty of janitors paid to pick up the trash for you. Now, that is just a high school statement, although he's young, so that was only about a decade and a half ago, and it connects because Miller deploys a pretty similar style today.
I am shocked at your statement that you think that only people from Great Britain and Australia would know English. It reveals your cosmopolitan bias to a shocking degree.
Okay, you're not answering the questions.
No,
I understand.
You have 24 hours a day of anti-Trump material, and you're not going to give 3 minutes for the American people to hear the real experience of Donald Trump.
There's one viewer that you care about right now, and you're being obsequious. You're being a factotum in order to please him, okay?
Now, when Congress appeared closer to an immigration compromise back in 2013, it was Miller, then an aide to Jeff Sessions, who worked hard to block any breakthrough by playing up the threat of immigration to Congress and reporters alike. He had some sense of where the GOP base was headed. He worked with Steve Bannon's Breitbart, which was a lesser-known outlet back then, to try to shape public perceptions about immigrant crime. Now, that was long before Donald Trump was in charge of the GOP or the country. It is a clue, though, that viewing Trump's actions and this border crisis as only about Trump could leave us missing the wider dynamics that he's tapping into, a growing antipathy towards immigrants in the U.S., as well as all of the drama across Western Europe, and fear about job losses and crime. Now, many people have been lying about the threats immigration poses to the U.S., and some of those same people now lying about immigration policy, too.
That's the law, and that's what the Democrats gave us. The Democrats forced that law upon our nation. We can either release all illegal immigrant families and minors who show up at the border from Central America, or we can arrest the adults for the federal crime of illegal entry.
Congress and the courts created this problem, and Congress alone can fix it.
It is telling that both Trump and his DHS secretary, who run this policy, are busy lying about it, as we just showed. Now, these lies are a kind of admission. They may now realize this is a bad move, either politically or morally, and they'd rather now deny it than work on fixing it. We know they are lying because we have the facts. The zero-tolerance policy is written and it's public, and Stephen Miller's own boss contradicted Trump's lie in a new Fox interview, admitting the abuse of children is part of the policy's goal of creating, yes, this big buzzword, a deterrent.
Are you considering this a deterrent?
I see that the fact that no one was being prosecuted for this as a factor in a 5-fold increase in 4 years in this kind of illegal immigration. So, yes, hopefully people will get the message and come through the border at the port of entry and not break across the border unlawfully.
If you are keeping score, here is where we are tonight. Trump and his DHS secretary lying about this. Jeff Sessions trying to have it both ways, but admitting, at least under questioning, what the goal is, the deterrent. And Stephen Miller, the original architect, not pretending this policy is anything but a clear and simple move to provide zero tolerance for these families and other humanitarian considerations. I should mention we've reached out to Miller for comment and to come on the beat. He's declined. 2 days ago, though, he publicly said in the New York Times that splitting families is a simple decision by the Trump administration to have a zero-tolerance policy for illegal entry, period. A simple decision. There's a cruelty in those 3 words, even by the standards of 2018. And I think it does lay bare part of how we got here and why this problem does run deeper than the spectacle of one Donald Trump. You've seen the pictures. People are suffering tonight. But tomorrow's story has not been written yet. There is a potential for a reckoning right now, for this nation to reflect on what we want done in our name and who we want leading these decisions. You know, immigration and asylum dilemmas are not typically black and white, to be certainly fair. From what the world owes the 5.6 million Syrian refugees right now to what the world did about roughly 60 million innocent Europeans displaced during World War II. It's not as if seriously looking at those problems and that instructive history leaves any particular policy or particular nation coming out perfect. But let's be clear. no one with any real experience reckoning with those challenges, from the families who lived it, to the humanitarian workers who tried to help, to lawyers and judges who deal in the thicket of asylum law every day. I don't think any of those people would seriously state that these kind of calls about law and mercy, about life and death, that these are simple decisions. And those calls, in those crises I mentioned, Syria, World War II, that's a long way from a proactive Trump U.S. government policy splitting children from their parents as a tool of deterrence, which of course may be a euphemism for intimidation. So as citizens, as we decide what to do each day about any potential reckoning, I think the most devastating thing you can probably say about Donald Trump and Stephen Miller right now isn't a criticism, it's not an attack. The most devastating thing is just their words stacked up against the results of their deeds tonight. Let everyone see it and hear it until we decide when it must stop. Mr. Miller says separating these families is a simple decision for zero tolerance for illegal entry, period.
Ella llama a tu tía si tú tienes número y habla con tu tía. Tengo el número de... Ah, pues ahorita ella te ayuda para que hables. Cálmate nada más. No, papá. Voy por aquí, niña. Papá.
That's Secretary of State Mike Pompeo there, ignoring a question about whether this migrant crisis undermines any of the moral authority of the United States. Now, Pompeo's predecessor as CIA director joins me now. John Brennan, thank you for being here. Your first time on the beat during a period of real controversy in the United States. There's plenty of moral questions. We just covered some of them. Do you see a national security component or problem to this Trump policy?
Well, I certainly do, not just from a humanitarian standpoint, and that audio tape was just devastating, and just listening to that, it's heartbreaking. But in terms of how the world views the United States and our allies and partners who for so many years looked up to us as setting a standard for what is right, what is moral, what is the right thing to do for the world, the fact that we now have an administration who seems to totally disregard that, I think it has tremendous implications for national security and reverberations around the globe. The United States is not that standard bearer anymore.
What position does it put public servants in who are still duty-bound to enforce most orders?
Well, it's very difficult for individuals, and the issue along the border is really a tough one. When I was at the White House during President Obama's first term, I was Homeland Security Advisor. These are not easy decisions, but the cruelty, the lack of empathy and compassion of the policy that's coming down from Mr. Trump really makes it difficult for those members of the Customs and Border Patrol, CBP, to be implementing policies that I'm sure many of them find reprehensible. So it really puts our public servants, our civil servants, in a very difficult position, and I'm sure a lot of them have tears on their cheeks right now.
Would this be something a political appointee should resign over?
I think somebody who is being asked to carry out something like this that is cruel, that is inhuman, and there's just a continuation of this policy. I could see if they were trying to implement something and then they realized, my goodness, there are these consequences that we really have to stop. But the fact that they're sticking to their guns and they're digging their heels, I think these are things that political appointees who, with a conscience and who really want to make a difference, should give serious consideration to departing the government.
You know a lot of things about a lot of things, as the old saying might go. So I want to also get you on this new Bob Mueller filing. It talks about discovery that identifies individuals that the government believes, that's Mueller, are continuing to engage in interference operations like those charged in the indictment, the idea that there's ongoing Russian interference. What is your view of the meaning of that? And when Bob Mueller says that, is he building a case, which we know means the most aggressive reading that prosecutors have, or would he be relying on the kind of intelligence that you used to oversee?
Well, I think both. When I was director of CIA, whenever we would get intelligence that had bearing on a counterintelligence investigation that the FBI had to pull the threads on, we would provide that information to the FBI. So I'm sure Bob Mueller, the special counsel's team, is now picking up things on their own investigative leads, but also using whatever intelligence is available. And I don't for 1 minute think that the Russians are taking a back seat in terms of trying to influence the political landscape here in the United States through the electoral process.
You are someone that has quite a public record and a lot of public esteem and respect. You've also said things that, as you know, people criticize. I want to ask you about one of those. Something you said on Morning Joe that based on what we know, maybe you can correct us, seems to be in the realm of speculation about what the Russians have or don't have on Donald Trump. Take a look.
I think he's afraid of the president of Russia.
Why?
Well, I think one can speculate as to why, that the Russians may have something on him personally.
Is it a good idea or even proper for a former intelligence official such as yourself to speculate on that? What is the purpose of that if perhaps, in fact, the Russians don't have anything on the president?
Well, I think I'm trying to explain a very puzzling phenomenon, which is Donald Trump playing a very fawning attitude and having this this deferential role almost to Vladimir Putin, trying to explain it. And so, yes, I said that one can speculate that the Russians may have something on him. As a former director of CIA, I'm not going to get into what I might have known at that time. That is classified. But I continue to just underscore my puzzlement over why Mr. Trump continues to take steps that appear to try to undermine the role of the special counsel in this investigation, that if he was totally innocent of any of these allegations of involvement, that he would allow the special counsel to pursue his investigation without any type of impediment.
So I want to press you on that respectfully. If someone listens to you say that, which is very intriguing given the stakes, and someone has the interpretation that you may be trying to lawfully refer to something that's classified that is true without confirming it.
I'm not lawfully referring to anything that might be true, but I'm not willing to reveal. I am just saying that it's unclear in my mind why Mr. Trump continues to have this attitude toward Vladimir Putin and the Russians.
Again, turning to another important topic you've been involved in, the use of drones, which is something that gets almost no attention anymore, but has been controversial. Reading here from a New York Times report just last week, President Trump has now oversaw not double, not triple, but 5 times as many lethal strikes in his first 7 months in office as Obama did during a 6-month corollary. And that was controversial when you were involved in that. Walk us through whether they're getting this right. Is it a problem if the numbers are up, or could that be justified? Because this is sort of a dark war that it appears we have very little public oversight on.
Well, I don't know the facts here, and I don't know what the conditions and circumstances are that the Trump administration is using the drone technology, which is remotely piloted aircraft, to actually put missiles and ordnance on targets. But President Obama was very adamant as far as making sure that we use that very powerful weapon of war in a very judicious fashion, and that we make sure that we have near certainty of no civilian casualties in the application of that weapon. And I don't know, my understanding based on some of the press reports is that high standard that existed during the Obama administration may in fact have been lowered.
Let me ask it another way, because I appreciate your precision. Would you apply that standard and easily end up on 5 times as many lethal strikes?
I find that hard to believe. Now, I know that there, over the course of the last 17 months or so, there's been a lot of urban warfare in places like Mosul and Raqqa, and it's much more difficult to carry out these types of strikes in areas where there are a large number of civilians. But the fact that if the reports are true that it's 5 times, I think that it would be very, very difficult to apply the same standards and have that many strikes.
And that seems like a very important story as well, given the fact that, as you allude to, there's a lot we don't know about it. Your first time on the beat, I really appreciate you coming by. A lot of big issues. John Brennan, former CIA director, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Ari.
And again, I want to tell you, we are not only tracking what Mueller said in the filing, but what Rudy Giuliani is talking about his own FBI interview for the first time. Also, after rumors of flipping, Michael Cohen taps a new lawyer tonight. But first, Donald Trump is still, as we mentioned, defending this border policy. Chris Hayes, my colleague, live outside a Texas detention center and joins me next. President Trump just departed his meeting with Republicans on Capitol Hill. No signs of him wavering on this border policy. And now we go live to McAllen, Texas, near a detention center. You're looking at a shot there of the president departing. And live from Texas is my colleague, Chris Hayes, host, of course, of All In with Chris Hayes. Chris, given the president's comments today, doubling down, what is the reaction, if any, you're hearing out there, and what are you seeing on the ground?
Well, people are really upset about what's going on here, and everyone who touches this system is saying it hasn't been like this before, that the combination of the policies that have been chosen by the administration, the numbers of people that are coming, is creating a crisis. The administration itself is telling people that they're overwhelmed. And one of the things you got to understand is there's sort of two policies that are happening here, and they're working in tandem. I was talking to an immigration lawyer down here who's practiced at the border for 40 years, and there's two things happening. We've been focusing a lot on family separation. That's a new policy. They're the zero tolerance policy, in which they're charging people with misdemeanors and separating their children, and then very unclear how they get them back. The other thing that is happening, and it's part of the same policy, it appears, is people being turned away at ports of entry when seeking asylum through the proper channels. Asylum is enshrined in American law. There's a statute that protect it. It's part of international law. They show up at the proper place where they're supposed to. They present themselves for asylum, and they are told, come back, we don't have room. And this is leading to families with children sleeping on bridges for weeks at a time because it's too dangerous to go back across this bridge from McAllen here to Reynosa. It is leading to people ultimately getting desperate and paying coyotes to come across the river and to cross illegally. So those two things that are happening, the prosecutions for illegal entry while preventing people from coming legally, appear to be part of a kind of pincer movement intentionally designed to choke off asylees trying to come into the country.
Well, you mentioned that, and that goes to the very harsh and sometimes cruel way that some of these things are being depicted. It is the U.S. government that's widely been reported to be mistreating these children in a way that, as you put it, is a choice. But here is the ICE director talking about it as if, well, anyone who brings a child is really the person putting the child at risk and thus responsible. Take a listen.
These parents themselves are using these children as pawns to gain entry to the United States, knowing that we can't detain them. And as far as the separation of families are concerned, you have to put the blame on the parents. They are choosing to enter between the ports of entry. They know they will be separated, but they want to blame the government when we were forced to do that. So let's put the blame where it lies.
Chris, give us the facts. Yeah.
First of all, they're not choosing in many cases to enter between the ports of entry because, as I said, they're being turned away when they go to the actual proper ports of entry. To those that are entering, let's keep in mind what these people are undertaking. Whether they're from Guatemala or from El Salvador, they are undertaking what is, by all accounts, the most dangerous journey a person can undertake in the world right now. It is absolutely a risk for death and for rape and for sexual assault and for kidnapping. And the only reason people are doing that is because they are in desperate straits, because their 12-year-old or their 15-year-old was attempted to be drawn into the cartels and said no, ended up with a bullet in his stomach, or was beaten by the side of the road. Stories like this are everywhere. So no one is coming across this journey of 1,000 of the most dangerous miles you can traverse in the world to, in the words of Jennifer Herbury, the immigration lawyer I talked to, get a new refrigerator. By definition, the trip itself is a deterrent, and people are doing it for their children because they are afraid their children will be taken from them, drawn into the cartels, or killed if they stay. That is what is driving people up through that dangerous passage to come to our border.
And just briefly, what do you think is the most important thing you're digging into in your reporting tonight as this crisis continues?
I think that it has to be seen as part of a larger enterprise by this administration to essentially choke off all of this. And what we're sort of coming into view is that somewhere inside DHS, some switch got flipped. Child separation is part of it, What's happening at the ports of entry is part of it. It is a totalizing attempt on the part of this administration to prevent desperate people who have the right to seek asylum from being able to exercise that right under U.S. and international law.
Yeah, I think that's well put. And as you know, the entire history of asylum law is having a structure for people who, as you were reporting, are in a desperate position, not of their own making. That's the whole point. Chris Hayes, I appreciate on a busy day down there you spending some time with us. I will mention All In with Chris Hayes is live, of course, tonight from Texas at 8 p.m. And then The Last Word, live as well from Brownsville, Texas at 10 p.m. with Rachel right in between. A lot of reporting on this story. We will stay on it. Now, up ahead, I've got some news that is pretty fascinating and would have been higher in the show if not for everything else. Michael Cohen, after the rumors of flipping, he's got a new lawyer. We'll tell you what's happening next. Some pretty interesting breaking news tonight. Donald Trump's longtime lawyer has a new lawyer. This comes from Vanity Fair. Michael Cohen hiring an attorney named Guy Petrillo, who handles money laundering, fraud, and other types of investigations. Now, Cohen split with his legal team last week after that hearing about his mostly failed attempts to hold back privileged materials from the FBI and very well publicized rumors that he may flip. Now, what happens next? We're not sure. But either way, Cohen's old boss, Mr. Trump, has said he ain't worried.
Are you worried that Michael Cohen might flip?
Look, I did nothing wrong. You have to understand. This stuff would have come out a long time ago.
Is he still your friend?
I always liked Michael Cohen. I haven't spoken to Michael in a long time.
Gives you a little flavor in the front lawn. Meanwhile, Rudy Giuliani out with this bombshell. He says that FBI agents personally interviewed him, all stemming back to that dramatic claim he made right before Election Day that Trump had a surprise for Clinton.
And then I think he's got a surprise or two that you're going to hear about in the next 2 days.
Right.
I mean, I'm talking about some pretty big surprise.
Oh, yeah, I heard you say that this morning. What do you mean?
You'll see.
You'll see. Now, Comey ultimately reopened that FBI probe, sort of, into Clinton's emails. And the concerns about leaks were significant enough that Comey explained what he did about it.
I commissioned an investigation to see if we could understand whether people were disclosing information out of the New York office or any other place that resulted in Rudy's report on Fox News and other leaks that we were seeing in the media. I don't know what the result of that was. I got fired before it was finished, but I know I asked that it be investigated.
This is actually a big deal because one of the questions is whether there was criminal leaking designed to impact the election. We don't know in any way if Rudy Giuliani did anything wrong. All we know tonight is that for some reason he is announcing he did FBI interviews about it. We will stay on the story.
Hey, it's Chris Hayes from MSNBC. You know, every day I come to the office and we make a television show. And every day I think to myself, there's so much more I want to talk about. And so this is our podcast. It's called Why Is This Happening? And the whole idea behind it is to get to the root of the things that we see play out every day. They're driven by big ideas. Each week, I sit down with a person uniquely suited to explain why this is happening.
New episodes of Why Is This Happening? Every Tuesday. Listen for free wherever you get your podcasts.